If you believe life can change in a single unexpected moment, if you believe love sometimes arrives disguised as chaos, and if you want stories that hit you in the chest and stay with you long after the screen goes dark, then stop scrolling right now. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me. Because this story begins with an empty chair, a forgotten reservation, and three little girls who walked into my life and shattered everything I thought I knew about fate. I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early because my mother raised me to believe punctuality was a form of respect, especially on a blind date arranged by a well-meaning coworker who swore the man was kind, stable, and ready for something real. And as I sat there smoothing my dress, sipping water, and pretending not to notice the sympathetic glances from the hostess, I told myself it was fine. People run late, traffic happens, nerves happen. But when 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30, and the candle between us burned lower without anyone sitting across from me, embarrassment began creeping up my spine like a slow fever, and I was already rehearsing the polite excuse I'd give myself for leaving when the restaurant door opened and three little girls walked in holding hands. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8, the youngest maybe 4, their hair still damp like they'd been rushed, their eyes scanning the room with serious purpose. And before I could even process why my heart suddenly started pounding, they stopped directly in front of my table, and the tallest one looked up at me with startling calm and said, "Are you the lady waiting for our dad?" And I blinked, confused, nodded out of instinct. And then she said the words that split my evening in two, "My dad is sorry he's late." And the entire restaurant seemed to fade as I stared at these three strangers who somehow knew exactly who I was waiting for. And before I could ask a single question, the youngest climbed onto the empty chair across from me, like she belonged there. The middle one leaned against the table, and the oldest explained, very matter-of-factly, that their babysitter canceled. Their dad had panicked, and he told them to come inside first while he parked because you looked nice and he didn't want you to think he forgot. And I should have stood up, should have said this was inappropriate, should have walked away. But instead I laughed, a surprised, helpless laugh that came from somewhere deep and honest. And I asked their names, and they told me, Lily, Emma, and Rose. And suddenly, my empty blind date had become a table full of crayons, apple juice, and unsolicited opinions about whether I looked more like a teacher or a princess. And when their dad finally rushed in, breathless, apologizing, eyes full of panic and shame, I expected irritation to rise in me. But what I felt instead was something unfamiliar and warm, because he didn't try to charm his way out of it, didn't make excuses. He just knelt in front of his daughters, checked their coats, and then looked at me and said quietly, "I understand if you want to leave." And something in the way he said it, like he already knew disappointment intimately, made me stay. And dinner unfolded in a way no blind date ever had before, messy and loud and real, with spaghetti stains and stories about school projects, and a man named Daniel who listened to his daughters like they were the most important people in the room, and somewhere between sharing breadsticks and helping Rose cut her food, I realized I was no longer on a date. I was witnessing a life. And when the check came, Daniel tried to insist on paying, flustered and apologetic. And I surprised both of us by saying, "Only if you let me see you again." And the look on his face wasn't triumph, it was disbelief. The kind that comes from someone who's been written off before. And over the next weeks we met again, this time planned. Sometimes with the girls, sometimes without. And slowly the truth emerged in fragments. His wife had died suddenly 3 years earlier. An aneurysm, no warning. One moment she was laughing, the next she was gone. And he'd been surviving since then, not living, just keeping the world stable enough for 3 grieving little hearts. And he hadn't dated because the idea of bringing someone into their fragile orbit terrified him. And I listened, and I stayed. And when the girls started leaving, drawings at my apartment, when Lily asked if I'd come to her school recital, when Emma crawled into my lap during movie night without asking, something in me shifted. But life doesn't hand out happiness without testing how badly you want it. And one evening, Daniel showed up pale, shaken, and confessed that his late wife's parents were filing for custody. Unfit, and the timing of our relationship was being twisted into evidence, and suddenly love became something that could cost him everything. And I watched him pull away, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much to risk losing his daughters. And weeks passed in silence. The girls vanished from my life like a dream I wasn't allowed to keep. Until one afternoon, I received a crumpled envelope in the mail filled with childlike handwriting and crooked hearts and a single sentence from Lily written carefully at the bottom. "Please don't disappear like Mom did." And I knew then that love wasn't about perfect timing or easy paths. It was about showing up even when you're scared. And I went to court, sat behind Daniel, testified not as a girlfriend, but as a witness to the truth of who he was every single day. And when the judge ruled in his favor, the relief in those girls' eyes broke something open in me forever. And months later, on a quiet evening, in that same restaurant where an empty chair once waited, Daniel took my hand while three little girls grinned like they'd planned it all along. And he said, "I was late because I didn't know how to believe in good things anymore." And I answered, "Sometimes they arrive anyway." And if you're still here listening to this story, remember this: love doesn't always walk in on time. Sometimes it comes late, holding three small hands, apologizing for the mess, and changing your life forever. No.